Why would a woman in a navy blue tank top walk straight into a Special Forces live fire range? No one had the answer. Not yet. The late afternoon sun hung low over the Carolina coast, scattering long ribbons of gold across the dunes. Wind moved like a slow tide through the tall seagrass, whispering secrets only the coastline understood. The air was thick with salt and heat, the kind that clung to skin and stayed in the lungs. Emily Sanderson's bare feet pressed into the warm sand as if she'd been born there. She moved with a steady, deliberate rhythm, her eyes scanning the ground for small, spiral treasures the ocean had abandoned. In her left hand, she carried a canvas collection bag, half filled with shells, some broken, some whole, each chosen with care. Shells had become her quiet obsession. Not for decoration, not for sale. For her, they were. Markers, tiny memorials. Reminders of the hours she'd spent here after her father's death. He had been a Marine recon officer, killed overseas 5 years ago. Emily had stood at the graveside, clutching the folded flag they'd placed in her hands, her fingers numb. Against the starched cotton, she told herself she'd never step into his world. Never wear the uniform, never walk his path. The ocean had been her way of keeping him close without crossing the line. Every wave that rolled in carried a whisper of his voice. Every shell was a piece of his memory she could hold in her palm. Today, the tide had been generous. She crouched, brushed grains of sand off a conch shell that spiraled almost perfectly from tip to base, and slipped it into her bag. She stood, turning toward the next dune, and stopped. Half buried in the sand was a small metal sign, weathered by salt and time. The letters were dull but legible. Authorized personnel only. Live fire range. She frowned, brushing the sand from her hands. This stretch of beach wasn't usually marked off, and the sound she'd been ignoring, those faint, sharp cracks rolling in from somewhere beyond the dunes, suddenly became clearer. Gunfire. Emily tilted her head, listening. Not random shots, controlled, measured, each separated by a long, deliberate pause. And faintly, just faintly, there was the distant metallic ding of rounds striking steel. She took a few steps forward, curiosity edging past caution. The wind shifted, carrying voices with it. Men's voices, laughter, teasing, the tone of people betting on something. Bet she couldn't hit the 3 to 9 foreplate if her life depended on it. Emily stopped again, the number catching her ear. She might not know military slang, but she knew distance. 3,294 meters, nearly 33 kilometers. Just over 2 miles. She looked toward the dune's crest and kept walking. On the other side, hidden from the beach, was a sniper's world. Camouflage netting stretched low to the ground. Beneath it, a line of soldiers lay prone, each behind a massive rifle balanced on bipods. Beyond them, the range stretched endlessly toward a ridge. Steel plates the size of manhole covers were scattered at distances so extreme they blurred into the shimmer of heat and light. Master Sergeant Cole Ramirez was behind one of the spotting scopes, chewing sunflower seeds. He'd been at this range longer than most of the young shooters under his command had been in the military. His gaze was sharp, the kind that measured a man in seconds and judged him without a word. At the moment, he wasn't looking at Emily. He was muttering corrections to a sniper named Jenkins. 3 inches right. Try again. Jenkins fired. The round took 7 full seconds to reach the target. Another near miss. Ramirez cursed under his breath. We're chasing perfection. Here, gentlemen, this isn't Call of Duty. Laughter rippled down the line. Someone nudged Ramirez, pointing toward the dunes. Sir, we've got a civvy crossing the line. Ramirez followed the gesture and saw her, a woman in a tank top and cargo pants, hair catching the sunlight, standing barefoot on the range like she belonged there. The soldiers noticed, their banter shifting into the kind of half-joking commentary men make when they think the subject can't hear them. Maybe she's lost. No way she's lost. Look at her. She walks like she owns the place. Bet she couldn't hit the plate at 3,294 if her life depended on it. They didn't know she'd heard. Emily stepped forward, closing the distance, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. Her eyes swept over the group, not quickly, not timidly. She looked like someone taking in a scene she'd already imagined in her head. "What's that?" she asked. Conversation stopped. Ramirez straightened and motioned her back with the kind of authority that rarely needed repeating. "Ma'am, you're in a restricted live fire zone. I need you to step back now." But she didn't step back. "I heard someone mention 3,294 meters, she said. "That's just over 2 miles, right?" The men exchanged glances. Jenkins grinned. "That's right. You even know what that means." "It means you're trying to hit something almost invisible," Emily replied. Ramirez narrowed his eyes. "You serve?" "No. My dad was Marine Recon. I'm just picking up shells." She held one up, its smooth spiral glinting in the sun. "Then why ask about the plate?" Ramirez pressed. Emily's shrug was casual, but her gaze didn't waver. "Because someone said I couldn't hit it, and now I want to try." The laughter came fast, sharp, dismissive. A couple of the younger snipers shook their heads. "You ever fire a Barrett M82? Ramirez asked, voice heavy with skepticism. "No." "Ever shoot anything?" "Archery," she said. "Competitive, national level until college." Her voice softened slightly. "And I can hold my breath underwater for over 3 minutes. Helps with focus." That quieted them. Ramirez studied her. She didn't have the stance, the calluses, the signs of someone who lived with a rifle in their hands. But she had something harder to read. Stillness. Not the frozen kind, but the kind that comes from knowing the world won't move you unless you let it. "You're serious?" "Dead serious." He spat another sunflower seed into the sand and nodded once. "Set her up. 1 shot. Wind steady." The protest started immediately. "Jenkins, sir, are we really?" I said, "set her up." The Barrett M82 was a beast long. Heavy, built for distances that most shooters never even dream about. It was designed to eat through armor, to make the impossible seem barely possible. Emily lay prone, boots digging into the sand for balance. Ramirez knelt beside her, making small adjustments to her stance, explaining the basics, how to shoulder the rifle, how to let the crosshairs float rather than force them into place, how to time the trigger, pull with the natural pause between breaths. "Target's a steel plate," he said. "You'll hear the ding if you hit 1 shot." She nodded. Through the scope, the world narrowed. The plate was a silver ghost on the far ridge. Heat shimmered around it, distorting its edges. Emily slowed her breathing, inhaled, exhaled, felt her heartbeat fall into a rhythm she'd known since her archery days. The trigger broke like glass under her finger. The Barrett roared. Sand kicked up around her. The recoil rolled through her shoulder, but she barely noticed. She kept her eyes on the scope, watching the plate. 7 seconds. Nothing. "I left 2 inches, the spotter called. 2 inches. At over 3,000 meters, on her first shot, no one spoke for a moment. Emily stood slowly, brushing sand from her arms. "Guess I need to practice." Ramirez blinked at her. He'd seen Tier 1 shooters miss by more on their best days. She turned to leave, walking back toward the dunes. "Wait," he called. She paused. "Come to Fort Bragg next weekend. You've got something." There wasn't luck. Emily smiled faintly, rolling a new shell in her palm. She didn't look back when she answered. "You're right," she said softly. It was instinct. Why would she actually show up? That was Ramirez's first thought when he saw her walking toward the Fort Bragg gates a week later. The morning air was sharp with the scent of damp pine, the kind of Christmas that came before the sun burned it. Away, Emily Sanderson stood in line at the security checkpoint, a single duffel bag over her shoulder, a faded baseball cap pulled low. Her boots were clean enough to look new, but there was still Carolina sand clinging stubbornly to the leather. This was no tourist stop. Fort Bragg was the kind of place that swallowed outsiders whole, especially civilians. She slid her ID across the table to the uniformed guard. His brows lifted when he saw the clearance form clipped behind it. He gave her a slow look, one that balanced suspicion and curiosity, then stamped the pass and handed it back. Follow the road straight in. Range is 3 clicks down. Emily nodded without a word, tucking the pass into her jacket. Inside, the base felt alive in a way the beach never had. Everywhere she looked, movement. Formations of soldiers jogging in cadence. Instructors barking orders, the metallic slam. Of weapons being checked and rechecked, there was a rhythm to it, a constant undercurrent of readiness. She didn't belong here, and yet she walked forward as if she did. Ramirez was waiting at the edge of the sniper range, leaning against a stack of ammo crates with his arms crossed. His face carried its usual scowl beneath the faded bowl cap. "You actually came," he said. "I said I would," Emily replied. "You expected me not to?" Most people flinch when they miss by 2 inches at 3,000 meters. I'm not most people. She stepped past him, eyes scanning the weapons bench lined with rifles of every size. The air here was different taut, heavy with concentration. Every few seconds came the muffled thunder of shots from another section of the range. Ramirez handed her a pair of ear protectors. "Let's see if lightning strikes twice." They started close by sniper standards, 600 meters. The first rifle she handled was smaller than the Barrett. More forgiving in weight and recoil, she adjusted her stance, listened to his quiet corrections, and squeezed the trigger. Ding. He nodded once. "Wind's at your back. Try 800. 800 became 1200. 1200 became 1500. With each distance, she adapted faster. Behind them, a small knot of soldiers gathered, pretending not to watch. They exchanged low murmurs. "She's good. Too good. Beginners." Luck. Ramirez didn't look at them. He kept his eyes on her. This wasn't luck. This was something else. Between rounds, he asked without looking up from his spotting scope. "You ever shoot real bullets before last week?" "No." "You competed nationally?" "Archery. Almost went to the Olympics. Then college. Life happened." He didn't press for more. There was a certain tone people used when a story was off limits, and she had just used it. By late afternoon, she was hitting 1,500-meter targets with consistency. Ramirez finally called a halt, handing her a bottle of water. "You're picking this up fast. Too fast. That a problem?" "No, it's just rare." "Maybe," she said, watching dust whirl downrange. "But it makes sense to me." The next stop was the indoor ballistic simulator, a dark room humming with servers, projectors and giant screens that shifted between terrains. This wasn't just shooting. This was reading the wind off a digital hillside, compensating for mirage distortion, making calculations when the numbers didn't want to add up. Emily scored 92% accuracy, higher than most. New recruits. She didn't smile. She simply asked, "What's next?" What was next was the tower drill. By the time she climbed the 30-foot steel stairs, the sun was dropping low, staining the sky with copper. The wind howled around the open platform, rattling loose bolts in the railing. Targets moved below, some barely visible, some appearing for only seconds before vanishing. "This is for selection phase shooters," one of the men muttered. "She's ready," Ramirez said simply. She lay prone, scope aligned, heartbeat steady. 10 targets appeared. 10 shots rang out. 9 hit their marks. Silence followed. The kind of silence where even the doubters don't have the energy to make excuses. Jenkins, the same man who'd laughed at her on the beach, found something interesting to study in his boots, back in the ready room. Ramirez tossed her a small patch, a dark insignia stitched with a red dot over a horizontal bar. "What's this?" she asked. "My old team's mark. They were the best." "You sure?" "I'm not even enlisted. Doesn't matter, skill speaks." Uniforms don't make snipers, precision does. She turned it over in her hands, unsure if she should feel honored or burdened. For the first time that day, she let her gaze drift, unfocused, toward the horizon outside the window. That night, she stepped outside the barracks and tilted her head back to look at the stars. They reminded her of the ones she'd seen over Afghanistan in the photos her father used to send. She'd sworn off the military world when he died. She'd promised herself never to set foot in the kind of places where danger and discipline live side by side. And yet, here she was standing on the edge of that world, not as an intruder, but as something in between. Early the next morning, Ramirez found her at the range, already cleaning a rifle under the first blush of sunrise. "You ever think about joining officially?" he asked. "Not yet. I still don't know if I belong here. You belong on the line. Wherever that may be, you're the calm before the shot. Sanderson, and calm wins wars." She didn't answer. Her eyes had shifted toward the far ridge, to the ghost of a target she had missed by 2 inches on her first day. The 3,294-meter plate. It wasn't just a challenge anymore. It had become a shadow in her mind. Why was a civilian being whispered about like a ghost? That was the question floating through the sniper community within days of her first week at Fort Bragg. Whispers start small, murmured at the coffee urn, muttered between drills, tucked into the lulls between commands. They grow when no one corrects them, and Emily Sanderson wasn't correcting anyone. It began as a joke, a civilian, no military background, shooting like she'd been born with a rifle in her hands, a beach girl who wandered onto a special forces range and nearly hit a plate over 3 kilometers away on her first try. But the name they gave her, the ghost, stuck for a reason. No one saw her coming, and when they finally did, she'd already hit the target. Ramirez didn't laugh at the nickname. He leaned into it. If they were going to call her a ghost, he was going to make sure she earned it. Her drills became harder, sharper, wind tunnels that whipped sand into her eyes, night shoots under starlight so faint the targets seemed to melt into darkness, variable distance arrays that forced her to break rhythm and adjust in seconds. She never complained, never bragged. Not when she nailed the moving target at 1,900 meters in a 40-mile-per-hour crosswind. Not when she outscored Jenkins twice on the double-speed drone tracker drill. Not even when 2 seasoned Army Rangers asked for her advice on long-range humidity compensation. She just listened, adjusted, and took the shot. But there was one shot she hadn't taken. The 3,294-meter plate still sat at the far end of the ridge. Glinting like a dare, Ramirez didn't let her forget it. "You'll know when you're ready," he'd say, nodding toward the distance. The opportunity came sooner than she expected, though not in the way she imagined. A manila envelope landed on Ramirez's desk. Delivered by hand, Emily wasn't supposed to see it. But she caught the title before he slid it away. Black Flag Invitational. Tier 1 sniper exercise. Top 12 shooters in the world. Extreme ranges, classified scenarios. No cameras, no spectators. And there, penciled in like a question, no one had answered yet, was her name. She raised an eyebrow. "Is this even allowed?" "Not officially," Ramirez said, his expression unreadable. "The Pentagon wants to see what happens when the impossible shows up uninvited." Her pulse stayed steady, but her voice lowered. "Why me?" "Because even Tier 1 shooters miss at 3,000 meters. You missed once, and barely. The Black Flag Range wasn't on any map. They called it Shadow Ridge, a stretch of Nevada desert where the ground cracked under the sun. The wind shifted direction mid-breath, and the heat bent light into lies. The nearest town was 50 miles away, and no one outside a need-to-know list even knew the place existed. Emily arrived in an unmarked SUV, flanked by 2 escorts who didn't speak the entire ride. She stepped out into heat that hit like a wall, cargo pants, cap, gear slung over one shoulder. No rank, no insignia, just silence. The competitors were already gathered. Australian SAS, British SFO, Polish Grom, Delta Force. Men who had spent their lives pulling triggers under conditions that would make civilians freeze. They watched her approach like they were watching a rumor take shape. Some smirked, one whispered, "Is that the beach girl?" The final event was announced over the loudspeakers. Cold bore shot, 1 bullet, 1 target. 3,294 meters. Wind, 23 knots crosswise. Temperature, 103 degrees. Mirage index, high. She felt her chest tighten, not with nerves, but with recognition. The same number, the same challenge. Only this time there was no ocean breeze, no dunes, no casual bed. This was it. They shot in reverse rank order, one by one. The world's best lay prone and took their chances. All missed, close, but no clean thing. When her name was called, Emily stepped onto the platform alone. The world shrank to the rectangle of her mat. She lay prone, adjusted the scope, dialed the wind, felt the dryness in her throat. The air was thinner here, less forgiving. Her fingers settled along the stock like it was an extension of her breathing. She inhaled deeply, let it go. The trigger moved under the weight of her fingertip. The recoil rolled through her shoulder. The shot vanished into the heat. 8 seconds later, ding. Not an edge hit, not a graze. A solid, unmistakable strike. The crowd didn't cheer. They froze, scopes lowered, eyes blinked. Even the range officer stared at his monitor before giving a slow nod. Someone exhaled. Holy hell. From a restricted distance, Ramirez watched with the faintest smile. The debrief was short. No congratulations. No ceremony. Just a line in a file. Sanderson, Emily. Status. Confirmed 3,294 meters hit. Record unofficial. Civilian. Precision verified. That night, as the others swapped war stories, a Navy SEAL approached her. He didn't offer a handshake, just a small nod. Good shot. She studied his face before replying quietly. I didn't shoot to prove something. I shot because no one believed I could. He nodded again. That's why it mattered. A week later, she was back at Fort Bragg. No parade, no press. Just drills, breath work, and the steady ritual of cleaning her rifle. But things had shifted. Soldiers nodded when she passed. Jenkins, who once rolled his eyes at her corrections, now asked for her opinion. Even the range masters started using her results in lectures. Ramirez found her after one of those long afternoons, tossing a small black patch into her lap. This one was different. Stitched in white thread was the outline of a ghost. You earned this, he said. What does it mean? He looked past her toward the far ridge, where the flags flickered in the wind. It means you're no longer chasing ghosts, he said. You've become one. Why would someone sabotage her scope? The question would haunt Emily for weeks, but when it happened, she didn't have time to ask it. It began quietly, with an envelope, not the kind that rattled with orders or bristled with official seals. This one sat on her kitchen counter, weighty and deliberate. Marked with the Pentagon's insignia, she stared at it for a long time before opening it. Inside was an offer. A civilian weapons consultant contract with the Department of Defense, embedded with long-range operations and sniper development units. It was unprecedented. Civilians didn't get these kinds of invitations. Not in her line of work. Her eyes drifted to the framed photograph on her shelf. Her father in his dress blues, smiling in a way that almost reached his eyes. He died in Helmand Province, Afghanistan, when she was 22. She remembered the military funeral, the sound of the rifles, the flag folded into her arms. The silence that came after. She had promised herself she would never cross into his world. And yet, here she was. When she brought it up to Ramirez later that afternoon, he leaned against the bench at the range and studied her face. You scared of uniforms? He asked. Or scared of becoming what you never wanted to be? Emily didn't answer. You don't have to carry a rifle to serve, he continued. Not everything in the military is about war. Sometimes it's about giving someone the skill to come home alive. That night, she visited Sergeant Kim, a wounded soldier she'd met briefly during earlier drills. He'd taken a round in the leg during a recon mission overseas and was recovering in a nearby military hospital when she stepped into his room. He looked up in surprise. "You're the ghost, right?" he asked. Emily shook her head, smiling faintly. "Please don't call me that. I heard what you did at Shadow Ridge," Kim said, grinning through the pain. "We've got guys in my unit who couldn't dream of that. You should take the contract." "I don't do it for records," she said quietly. "I just want to make a difference." "Then do it," Kim replied. "Because we don't need more shooters, we need teachers." She left his room with her mind settled. The next morning, she signed the contract. Her first assignment under the Pentagon's banner took her to a classified training site in Colorado. Elevation, 8,600 feet. Wind conditions, brutal. Temperatures, freezing at night, sun-scorched by day. The purpose, to prepare special forces, candidates for precision shooting under the kind of environmental stress that broke focus and ruined accuracy. Emily was co-leading the rotation with Ramirez. On paper, her authority was clear. In practice, it was anything but. Some of the younger soldiers made little effort to hide their skepticism. "Who's the civvy?" One muttered during her first briefing. "She's not even Army," another said, "not quietly enough." During drills, they rolled their eyes when she corrected them. One trainee deliberately altered his scope settings after she calibrated it, only to miss his shot completely. It wasn't just doubt. It was resistance, Ramirez noticed, but he didn't intervene. Not yet. He let it build, like a storm gathering on the horizon. The breaking point came one cold morning. Emily was prepping her gear for an advanced spotter sniper demonstration live ammunition, simulated enemy targets. When she checked her spotting scope, something was wrong. The lenses were misaligned. The reticle scratched just enough to throw aim off. A shot taken through it could have been wildly inaccurate, dangerously so. And this wasn't just any drill. She was supposed to partner with Ramirez. One bad calculation and a misaligned shot at that distance could have injured him. They caught the sabotage in time. The range shut down immediately. Military police moved in within hours. The culprit was found, a disgruntled contractor, jealous of her position, bitter about her involvement. He had the access, the motive, and the arrogance to think he could get away with it. He didn't. His clearance was revoked on the spot. That night, Emily sat outside her quarters with her elbows resting on her knees. The cold biting at her fingers, she stared at the ground and whispered to herself, "I don't belong here. You don't get to say that." Ramirez's voice came from behind her. "They do," she said, not looking up. "Even the ones who hated you saw how you handled it. You didn't yell. Didn't panic. You recalibrated that sniper mentality. Not soldier, not civilian, just sniper." She still didn't look convinced. "Tomorrow," Ramirez said, setting a new spotting scope beside her, "we redo the demonstration. No assistive gear. Just you and me. Natural elements. That's steel. Plate's going to wish it had legs." The morning was clear but brutal. The wind came in sharp gusts, the kind that bent flags and stole heat from fingers. They set up 2,200 meters from the target. No tech, no digital readouts, just breath, calculation, and instinct. Emily went first, lying prone, reading the wind by the twitch of range flags and the feel of the air on her cheek. She fired. Ding, bullseye. The line fell silent for a heartbeat, then applause broke out, even from the trainees who doubted her. Later that week, she found a folded note tucked into her gear bag. It was from Cooper, one of the younger Green Berets who had openly mocked her in the first briefing. "You didn't have to stay, but you did. You didn't have to prove anything, but you taught us anyway. Thanks for showing me what precision actually looks like." She tucked the note into her journal, next to the photo of her dad. That night, She looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, 3,294 meters away, a place still waited, but now it didn't feel like she was chasing it. She was leading others toward it. Why would the Pentagon approve a program that some of its own commanders hated? Emily learned the answer the hard way. It started with a quiet meeting, no brass, no public announcement, just a room buried deep inside a Fort Bragg operations building. The kind of place where fluorescent lights hummed over cold concrete and the air smelled faintly of burnt coffee and gun oil. Inside, Ramirez stood at the head of a small table, a manila folder in his hand. Across from him sat a defense contractor, with a pinched face and a tailored suit that didn't fit the mood. On the wall, a whiteboard was covered in diagrams, wind drift charts, trajectory curves, humidity indexes, but it wasn't the data that caught Emily's attention. It was the title at the top. Adaptive Distance Neutralization, her program. The concept was simple. Merge civilian precision shooting techniques with special operations protocols. Train snipers to hit under extreme conditions without relying solely on technology. Use instinct as much as instrumentation. It wasn't about pulling the trigger faster. It was about when not to pull it at all. To some, it was genius. To others, it was heresy. What's next? The contractor scoffed. Rubber bullets and hugs? Emily didn't rise to the bait. Ramirez did. You don't have to like it. You just have to accept it's already producing results. The program was greenlit, but not without enemies. One of them had a name she'd remember for a long time. Braden Holt, former Marine, now a private defense tech specialist. He'd spent years trying and failing to get his own precision protocols adopted. And here she was, a civilian, leapfrogging his career in less than a year. When the orders came for her next major training exercise, she wasn't surprised to find Holt's name buried in the roster. He'd be there, overseeing weapon systems integration, which, in plain English, meant he'd be watching and waiting. The training site was a dust-blown range deep in Arizona, sun glaring off the rocks like a mirror. Temperatures topped 100 degrees before noon. Hope you brought sunscreen, Holt said as she stepped off the transport. His smirk was the same kind of smirk she'd seen 100 times before, from men who assumed her place on the line was temporary. I brought a scope, she replied. It sees through smirks. The exercise began with daylight navigation, then long-range reconnaissance under simulated duress. Emily's role was to coordinate sniper-spotter teams from both Army and Marine units, teaching them to adapt to shifting conditions without leaning on technology as a crutch. By the third day, the drills were running smoothly. Then the windstorm hit. Visibility dropped to near zero. Communication crackled with interference. One Marine team fell behind schedule, and in that chaos, a target popped up on a cliff edge over 2,000 meters away. Emily reacted instantly, scoping the range, calculating drop, compensating for elevation and wind pressure. She passed the data to the lead Marine. He fired. The round missed. Badly. Too badly. The shot hit the rocks just feet from a trainee acting as a forward observer. 1 inch closer, and it wouldn't have been a training accident. It would have been something far worse. Ramirez's voice cut through the comms. Cease fire now. Emily's mind was already running the numbers again. Something didn't add up. The wind had shifted, but not enough to explain a misstep wide. She pulled up her targeting logs. The calibration profile she'd entered hours earlier was completely wrong. Check my tablet, she told Ramirez. A diagnostic sweep confirmed it. Her data had been altered. The source? An unauthorized firmware patch uploaded from a private field server. Holt's server. By nightfall, the investigation was over. Holt was removed from the site without a word. His contract terminated. But the damage was done not to her record, but to her trust. That night, she sat alone in the range shed, her rifle resting across the table. The shadows in the corners seemed heavier than usual, the silence sharper. What if I'd caused a real injury? She asked when Ramirez finally walked in. You didn't. But what if I had? He crouched across from her. You trusted your system. Someone sabotaged it. The fault isn't yours. She looked down at her hands. What do I do now? He slid a folded range schedule across the table. Tomorrow, same shot. No tablet. No digital assist. Just you and the rifle. Show them it wasn't the tech. It was you all along. The next morning, the air was cold and still. She stood alone. At the edge of the range, the target, 2,214 meters away, gleamed faintly in the early light. She adjusted for wind by eye, felt the humidity in the air, ran the calculations in her head. The shot broke clean, ding. The sound rolled across the valley like a verdict. Ramirez, watching from above, smiled. Message received, he muttered. Word spread fast. The ghost had been sabotaged and still didn't miss. Within days, Emily got a call from the office. Of irregular warfare. They wanted to fold her methods into a new experimental sniper course. Not just for U.S. forces, but for allied nations, civilians included. She was to co-develop the program, train field leaders, and consult on weapon behavior under extreme battlefield variables. At first, she didn't answer. She told herself she needed time. Then one night, while cleaning her gear, she found an envelope slid under her door. No return address. Inside was a single photo. The 2,214-meter target she'd hit in Arizona. Spray painted across it in red were 3 words. Try again, ghost. She stared at it for a long time. Whoever sent it knew exactly what to say or not say to pull her back into the fight. By Monday morning, she'd called the Pentagon. I'm in. Why would the best shooters in the world look at a civilian with respect? Emily was about to find out. The Allied Distance Warfare Symposium wasn't public. No press, no social media, no photographers. It was held at a decommissioned weapons testing site in Utah, a covert training hub buried under layers of clearance and need-to-know protocols. The invitation list was short. Representatives from 10 allied nations, dozens of elite marksmen and markswomen, and 1 civilian, the ghost. She arrived without fanfare. No formal introduction. No speech. Just her gear, her notes, and the same quiet focus she'd carried since the day she first stepped into Ramirez's line of fire. But something had changed. This time, when people looked at her, they didn't smirk. They didn't exchange skeptical glances. They nodded, quietly, respectfully, the kind of acknowledgement that only comes from shared understanding, an unspoken recognition between those who've been tested. By the wind, the distance, and the weight of a single decision, not everyone approached her. Some just gave her space. But one man crossed the gravel without hesitation. I watched your clip at 2,214, he said, his accent carrying the round vowels of New Zealand. Made the hair on my arm stand up. She shook his calloused hand. And you are? Calcine Archer, New Zealand Recon. I study wind like it's a religion. She smiled faintly. Then, we speak the same language. The symposium wasn't a competition. Not exactly. It was a gathering of outliers, each with their own way of reading the world. Some brought gear so advanced it looked like it had been stolen from the future laser rangefinders, ballistic computers, even AI-assisted scopes. Others arrived with stripped-down bolt-action rifles, paper notebooks, and decades of handwritten equations. Emily brought both and something else on the far end of the range. She had set up her own challenge, a single steel plate at 3,294 meters, the same impossible distance from her first encounter. On the beach, next to it, she planted a small white flag, not a surrender, but a signal. The rules were simple. 1 clean shot, 1 attempt, no artificial assists. Feel the wind. Some laughed, some shook their heads, but a few stared at the plate in silence. One of them was a woman in her mid-40s, sharp-eyed under a marine cap. Her name tag read, SG Team L. Riker, USMC. Read. I followed your file for years, Riker said, walking up to her. Tried to copy your sighting methods in Kandahar. Got my spotter killed instead. Emily blinked, the weight of the admission settling between them. I'm sorry. Don't be. That war was hell. But your method, if it can be taught, can save lives. Emily held her gaze. Then let's teach it. For the next 2 days, Emily didn't take a single shot. She walked the lines, coaching shooters on micro-wind behavior, mirage shift, and barrel harmonics under extreme heat. She taught breath timing based on pulse beats, not the clock. One Canadian sniper, trying for years to hit a 2,800-meter plate, finally landed it under her guidance. He broke into tears when the ding echoed back. Emily didn't take credit. She just nodded and told him, feel the weight of distance, not the fear of it. By the third day, every shooter had tried the 3,294-meter plate. All had missed, and then it was her turn. The desert was dead silent. Emily lay prone, cheek pressed against the cold steel of her rifle. It was a custom hybrid lightweight carbon, hand-lap barrel, scope calibrated to her vision index. Not fancy, just true. She dialed for elevation, corrected wind by taste, a method only she used, feeling the moisture and heat on her cheek to sense high-altitude flow. One breath, another. She didn't pull the trigger. She released it. The recoil thumped into her shoulder like an old friend. 3 long seconds, ding. No echo. Just that hollow, distant tone. Someone whispered, no way. The flag swayed behind the plate. The group stood still. No cheers, no celebration. Just respect. Riker walked over and offered her a half-smile. You just made ghosts real. That night, they gathered around a small desert fire pit. No ceremony, no awards, just shooters sharing space. A flask passed from hand to hand. Someone lit a cigar. No. One talked about the shot. They talked about instinct, about trust, about fear, about what it meant to see too far. Emily spoke only once. The rifle doesn't make the shot. The world does. You just have to listen better than everyone else. No one argued. Months later, those words would be carved into the base of the new U.S. Long-Range Ethics Training Hall. But that night, they were just words, quiet, unpolished, and real. Weeks after the symposium, Emily thought life might slow down. She was wrong. Her demonstration had rippled through the sniper community, shaking doctrine at its core. Requests started coming in. Allied forces wanted her consulted before desert deployments. Black Ops commanders wanted her methods adapted for covert operations. And then came the encrypted message. No sender, no subject line, just 7 words. We saw the shot and the pause. That was rarer than skill. She knew, and whoever sent the message knew it too. You're invited to Barrow Base. 72 hours. Barrow Base wasn't on any map. Above the Arctic Circle, no roads, no press. No one came here unless they were meant to. She packed light, her rifle, thermal gear, and a notepad. The last felt unnecessary until she stepped off the transport plane and saw the base for the first time. The wind hit her like it had a grudge. Ice sliced sideways, snow refused to settle. The man waiting for her didn't offer a handshake, just a nod. Scars across his knuckles, eyes that hadn't blinked since Kosovo. You're not here to shoot, he said. You're here to teach. The invisible, Emily frowned. Define invisible. The space between information and action, between crosshairs and conscience. She paused. That's not shooting, that's intuition. Exactly, he said. Most can't survive that space. We need people who can. Why would someone teach a skill that might never be measured? Emily knew the answer the first night at Barrow Base. The place didn't look like much from the outside, just a cluster of squat, insulated buildings huddled against the endless white. But inside, the air was warm. The walls lined with maps and atmospheric data charts. The floors warmed by boots from every branch and nation imaginable. Her class wasn't a class at all. They were anomalies, not the best shots in their units. Not the fastest. Not the most decorated, but the ones who had done something that couldn't be explained on paper. A Canadian reservist who'd hit a target in pitch darkness without night vision. A Norwegian Arctic Ranger who'd once threaded a bullet through a snowstorm gap that lasted less than a second. A British Army medic who'd made a 1,900-meter shot with a weapon she'd never trained on saving a pin down. Patrol. They weren't here to learn ballistics. They were here to learn Ghost Protocol. The first lesson wasn't about rifles. It was about silence. "Put your rifles away," Emily told them, her voice steady. "Tonight, we listen." They sat outside in the cold until their breath froze in the air. No one spoke. She made them close their eyes, track the wind by feel, measure the way their heartbeat shifted in the cold, sense how the snow muffled certain sounds but amplified others. One soldier muttered, "This isn't training. It's a mindfulness retreat." She didn't react. 2 hours later, they were back inside, hands wrapped around mugs of coffee. Emily wrote 3 words on the board. "Measure before you see." "This," she said, "is how you survive the space between crosshairs and conscience. It's not about whether you can take the shot. It's about whether you should, over the next week." The training grew stranger. She had them shoot blindfolded at close range, not to hit the bullseye, but to feel the shot align before they confirmed it visually. She made them hold position for hours without firing, tracking invisible targets across the tundra by environmental cues alone. Some resisted, others adapted. By the 5th day, the doubters were the ones staying on the range after hours. The Canadian reservist Calcine Frost was the first to get it. During a long-range cold bore drill, he adjusted his aim without explanation and nailed the target. When asked how, he simply said, "The snow stopped falling sideways." Emily didn't smile, but she made a note in her journal. Then the mission came. It wasn't part of the plan. The Ghost Protocol program was still classified, still in development, but on the 7th morning, a C-17 landed at Barrow Base. Engines howling against the cold. 2 men stepped off, both in black parkas with no insignia. They carried a single folder. Ramirez was with them. Inside the briefing room, the lights were low. The only sound the hum of the heater. Ramirez slid the folder across to Emily. "Forward recon team in the Alborz Mountains," he said. "NATO. They were tracking a high-value smuggler with ties to arms deals. Got pinned by a sniper we can't locate. We've lost 2 already. No one can get a beat on them." She opened the folder, photos, topography maps, wind data, elevation charts. "This isn't a mission," she said quietly. "This is an execution. For whoever we send. That's why we're sending them," Ramirez replied, nodding toward her trainees. The room went still. She looked at each face. Frost, the Norwegian, the British medic, and 3 others who had spent the week learning. Not just how to shoot, but when not to. "Who's lead?" she asked. Ramirez didn't hesitate. "You." The insertion was brutal. They flew into a thin airstrip at the base of the range, switched to snowmobiles, then trekked on foot into the high ridges. Temperatures dropped fast. The wind carried a bite that made every inhale feel like glass. Emily set up an observation point 2 ridges over from the pinned recon team. Through the scope, she saw nothing, just rock and shadow. The enemy sniper was good. Too good. They weren't giving away muzzle flash, weren't breaking silhouette. She called Frost over. "Feel the wind." He closed his eyes, shifted west. 30 seconds ago, higher gusts up top. Emily adjusted her position. She wasn't looking for the sniper. She was looking for where the sniper had to be to see the recon team. That narrowed it to one jagged rock outcrop. She didn't take the shot. She passed the rifle to the British medic. "You see it?" The medic nodded once, adjusted, fired, ding. It wasn't a kill. It was a warning. The round hit the rock face just inches from the enemy's hide. Through the scope, Emily saw the silhouette vanish. The fire on the recon team stopped. They moved. Before the enemy could reset, extracting the trapped soldiers under cover of the setting sun. Hours later, back at Barrow Base, no one celebrated. They sat in silence, sipping coffee, letting the weight of it sink in. Emily finally spoke. Sometimes the point isn't to end the fight. It's to end the moment that makes the fight inevitable. The British medic looked up. So that's Ghost Protocol? She nodded. That's Ghost Protocol. The next morning, Ramirez handed her a sealed envelope, no name, no rank, just a single line inside. Next time, they'll expect you. Why did the message feel heavier than the mission? Because Emily knew what next time meant. It came 3 weeks later, an encrypted call at 2:17. Ramirez's voice was steady, but there was a faint tightness in it. Eastern Steppe. He said, border dispute gone ugly, hostage situation. They're moving them at dawn. One sniper, one chance. It's yours. The rest of the details spilled out in clipped fragments. Terrain, distance, weather patterns, but Emily's focus stopped at a single number. 3,294 meters. She hadn't heard it since that first day on the beach, when a bet had turned into a legacy. Only now, it wasn't a game. There would be no flag to wave, no steel plate to ding. This time, if she missed, someone would die. The insertion was a nightmare of logistics. Helicopter to dirt strip to half-track transport, half-track to snowmobiles. The air was thin enough to leave a burn in her chest when they reached the Overwatch Ridge. The world opened up beneath her rolling frost-bitten plains broken by jagged rock and scattered pine. The wind was alive here, shifting every few seconds, a predator with no pattern through her scope. She found the convoy. 3 trucks, moving slow, and there perched on an abandoned watchtower was the opposing sniper. They had the height, the angle, and the advantage of being the only one who didn't have to move. Ramirez lay next to her, glassing the terrain. That tower's your window. After they clear it, you've got maybe 4 seconds before you lose line of sight. 4 seconds at 3,294 meters. In shifting wind, with lives depending on it, Emily didn't answer. She was already mapping the space between her heartbeat. She'd been here before, not this ground, not this mission, but this feeling. The beach, the first impossible shot, the symposium in the Utah desert, the Arctic ridges. Every moment had been building to this, not the skill, not the numbers, but the patience. The rifle lay warm under her hands. The barrel was steady, the stock molded to her shoulder. She felt the wind on her cheek, first left, then right, then back to left again. She could taste the air, dry and metallic. Ramirez's voice came through the cum. 2 minutes out. She adjusted her elevation half a mil higher than the charts suggested. The wind wasn't just shifting. It was layered soft crosswind low, brutal sheer high. The shot would have to ride both. Her mind stripped away the noise, the cold, the risk, even the trucks. Just her, the tower, and the moment between, the convoy. Slowed at a washed-out stretch of road, the sniper on the tower shifted position. Adjusting for their own shot, Emily inhaled. The tower swayed slightly in the wind, enough to matter, enough to demand she wait. 30 seconds, Ramirez whispered. She felt her pulse in her trigger finger, the rhythm slow, measured. She wasn't waiting for stillness, she was waiting for alignment. The wind hit her cheek, cold and sharp. The flags at the base of the convoy trucks fluttered once, twice, then froze in perfect balance. Now, she didn't pull the trigger, she released it. The recoil was a memory before the round had crossed half the distance. 3 seconds, 4 crack. The figure on the tower jerked sideways, weapon clattering against the railing. Ramirez's voice came low, controlled. Hit. The convoy roared. To life, pushing through the washout. Within minutes, the hostages were in Allied hands. Emily rolled onto her back, staring at the pale winter sky. It felt like breathing for the first time in hours. They exfiltrated before nightfall, leaving no sign they'd been there. On the transport out, Ramirez didn't speak for a long time. Finally, he looked over. "You know what you just did?" She gave a faint smile. "I didn't miss." He shook his head. "No, you didn't just make the shot. You made it yours. Nobody else could have read that wind the way you did. Not at that range, not under that clock." Emily didn't answer. She didn't need to, back home. She returned to her quiet routine. No parades, no medals. Just mornings with coffee, evenings with the sound of waves against the shore. The rifle stayed in its case. Weeks later, a package arrived with no return address. Inside was a small steel plate, roughly cut, with a single dent dead center. No note. She set it on her desk, next to the framed photograph of her father. Sometimes, she thought, dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.